Good morning, everybody. My name is John Miller. I handle the marketing for Lead to Goals. I just wanted to take a quick moment and thank you all for joining us for the presentation today, the strategy behind strategic planning. Also, just a couple notes for those of you signing on. If you want to ensure that you receive the free ebook that we offered, just go ahead and enter your full name in the chat box, and then I can reference that with the registration list and ensure that you received it. Additionally, if you have any questions at any point during the presentation, feel free to put them in the chat box and we will answer them as we move along. All right, thanks very much. And with that, Scott DeLong.
Well, first of all, thank you all for attending. I really appreciate this. I'm going to try to be really respectful of your time. So what we're going to do is if there's a real poignant question that we get to in the spot, we'll stop and answer that right then. But if we can do most of them at the end of the presentation, that way folks that have time crunches can certainly get off. But I do want to be respectful of that. And so here we are. We're talking about the strategy behind strategic planning, and strategy is generally defined as a plan or action that leads to a larger goal or objective. And we'll talk about action in just a little while. But right now, what we're going to be talking about is the plan. And there's several things that we're going to go through here throughout the day. We're going to talk about the purpose of strategic planning, who should participate, the pre-retreat or pre-session planning that goes involved in that, the retreat process itself, how to deal with those action items, and then finalize with the communication plan, which is, frankly, for your organization, and depending how many layers of folks are in the organization, the communication plan may be the most important portion of this. And we'll talk about the reasons why in a little bit. So the purpose, several that I see. And not everyone goes through this process when they're dealing with organizing and putting strategic plans together, but review who we are and where we are as an organization. The who is the culture, right? How we do things around here. Our standard processes are the core values, the mission of the organization, the vision, right? Which is the vision is determining where we're going. Where are we going with this, and what are we trying to do? So I like thinking about vision in a Stephen Covey mindset, which is begin with the end in mind. Vision is, to me, one of the most important things that we can do is create a vision and share a vision of a future that we have not yet realized. So what does that look like to folks? And I get really specific with this when we're dealing with organizations, and I want people to create a vision that they can actually see in their mind. My own personal vision, it actually looks like a movie. I can see the people and the things that are moving around, and it's that clear to me. And that clarity on the vision is what helps define the process and what we're going to go do. And that process is developing the goals to get us where we want to go. So the vision is where we want to go. And then there's a process of begin with the end in mind, come up with the end, and then start working backwards. There's an old saying that write your obituary and work backwards, right? And that's how to live a good life. Well, strategic planning is very similar to that. So once we have the vision, we can go into working backwards on how to do that. And our process, as you'll see a little bit later, objectives, goals, strategies, and then action steps. And we get through most of that stuff within this 2.5, 3 day strategic planning process that we've got developed. The other thing that we're going to want to do is we want to determine the champions of all of those initiatives. Who is going to be in charge? Somebody has to be responsible. We never get anything done. If we are assigned a task, everyone else points fingers to see where that is. So who is it going to be? Is it going to be Victoria that's responsible for this ultimately, or Sunny, or Faith, or Andy, or Carolyn? Who that person is, and that needs to be determined from this as well. And then one of the last things that happens during these offsite retreats, and we've done them on site in conference rooms before, but I really prefer the offsite, because during the offsite, we get people to really concentrate and focus on what they're doing, and they can actually develop their team. And we'll talk a little bit about that as we go further. So those are the purposes of a strategic planning session. And now we'll talk about who should participate. I think all C-level staff should be there. They all have functional responsibilities for something: CFO, COO, CEO, chief sales officer, chief human resources officer, whoever that might be. And depending on the size of your company, then I'd recommend having department heads and or the vice presidents. So people that might be responsible, maybe the controller, maybe somebody a level down from the CFO, one level down from each of those C staffs in the functional departments that they run. We'll talk about that in a little bit again on why those people are important to be there. The other thing that I strongly recommend to companies, especially growing companies, are high potential directors. So we can go down a step further. And the reason that we're doing the high potential directors is, one, they're going to be younger with newer and fresher ideas, or at least younger within the company, not age necessarily, but younger within the company. And you see them driving. They've only got to the director position. They're not quite yet a vice president, but they have ideas and thoughts and ideas. That's great. That's one reason. But the second reason to have those people in there is because you want to help develop them so they can get to the next level. We tend to promote people because they're really good at something. They're good at their job. Individual contributor moves up to a manager that moves up to a director that moves up to a vice president. And we don't train the people how to be in the room with others like who they're going to be in the room with. So if you get this high potential director that wants to become a vice president, bring them in with the vice presidents and let them observe, let them play with that. I also suggest a facilitator. What I do is I'm a facilitator. And the reason I recommend that, besides it gives me a job, is that the facilitator does a really important function. Your CEO can run a strategic planning event. They know how to do that. The problem with having them do that is the power that's in the room at the time. So give you an example of what happens when a CEO is in the room and running a meeting. Let's say, we're going to do a tactical thing here. Let's say we're talking about logo colors, and Vice President A says green would be a great color, and Vice President B says pink. Vice President C would say yellow, and the CEO pops in and says, I like blue. Well, immediately what happens, because of the power dynamics, is that we start talking about shades of blue. Green or orange or yellow or pink might have been the right answer for us, but because of the power structure. So what a facilitator can do for you, it can level out that power. Now, ultimately, CEO is going to have veto power on everything. It's their company. They're the ones that are operating it. That's great. But if they want to participate in the strategic planning, in the process of that, you bring in somebody like myself or another facilitator that can move the power. It's no longer their meeting. It's now my meeting. And then, so how I handle that is, when I'm working with CEOs, and they are generally the ones that I work with when we work on strategic planning, is we have pre-retreat meetings about that. And I just let them know, here's how it's going to be, and here's what's going to happen, and here's the reason it's going to happen. It's in your best interest to be a participant, to share your ideas and not dominate the conversation. However, like most CEOs, they will tend to start dominating the conversation. They want to make sure they're heard. And it's really easy for me at that point to get them to slow down. I can either just give them a look. If they still won't stop and slow down, I stand up and I walk and stand next to them. I mean, it's really just subtle changes for them to recognize, oh, wait, take the CEO hat off and put the participant hat on. So that's probably the best reason I can see for having a facilitator, besides having someone that can organize and structure the whole thing for you to make sure that we get all your needs met. And then lastly, and has an asterisk on it, is administrative assistant. I like having one there to be able to take notes and take detailed notes, because none of us, myself, the people in the room, won't have time to get the details done. What we want them doing in that room is using their brains, not their fingers, right? Not scribbling things down all the time. Ideas and thoughts, certainly, but not all the details. So if you have the opportunity to have an administrative assistant, one that takes really good notes, then have that person there. Otherwise, there's other techniques that we can utilize to make sure that we make sure that we get all the information out and back to people. We get into process a little bit and how we do that, and I can give you some of those clues as well. So there's a lot that has to go on prior to the strategic planning event itself, and the first thing that has to happen is that the boss or the head, the group, whatever that decision-making process is going to want to have to sit and determine the objectives and the desired outcomes. and share those with your facilitator. Make sure your facilitator knows what it is that you're trying to get out of this, because that person will get those things out of it for you. Decide on a location and venue. Again, I like offsite, but we've done them in-house. The offsite allows us to free our minds, not worry about phone calls coming in, not worry about day-to-day operations. Who needs what from me? We're offsite, we're unavailable. We can focus on the task at hand. And it's an important task. Creating the strategic plan and plan for the future and how we're going to get there is an important task for the organization. So location and venue. It can be some fancy place, but it doesn't necessarily need to be. I love beach locations. So go to the beach so we have something else to do on the offsite. And there's some really good reasons for that. And when we get into the create the fun portion, we'll talk about some of those reasons as well. The other thing we need to do is to develop the agenda. How are we going to go about this? We have a sample agenda coming up in a few minutes for you to take a look at on one that might work, but develop the agenda. From that point, the facilitator no longer needs the corporate blessing, right? You've given me enough information in order to move forward and create the things that I need to create. So we want to set the expectations among the participants. What are those expectations? If you're going to show up, you need to speak up, right? That's just important. I don't want you to come into a meeting and just sit there. You need to be able to use your voice. Sometimes we need to teach people how to speak truth to power. And sometimes they're a little bit afraid to do that. But as they see the process and how things roll throughout the 2.5, 3 days that we spend doing this, they'll realize that the space that they're in is safe enough that they can raise their hand. They can blurt out an answer. They can throw out a new idea, because that idea is going to be accepted by the person that's in charge of the meeting, by me in this case, and not rejected by anyone else in the meeting. There's the whole thought process on how to brainstorm and all of that we can chat about. Unfortunately, in the 40-minute presentation, we're not going to be able to give you all the details, things you would need to do, but there's ways of getting people to participate. The first thing that you need to do in order to do that is to create the psychological safety. And that's usually distracted by power differences and how those power differences are displayed. So be cautious when you see it. If you have someone that can manage that, again, the role of facilitator is to manage that. But if you don't use a facilitator and you want to do it on your own, make sure that you have somebody that's willing to put up a red card or a yellow card or whatever to slow down someone that's trying to dominate the thing. Something I strongly believe in that is, no matter how smart your CEO is, we are smarter than me. The collective group is going to have better, more well thought out processes and ideas than the CEO himself, herself can do by themselves. They're limited to the vision that they have. And what we've hired all of you for, the rest of the group that's participating, is because all I can see is what I can see. We need your ideas, and we need you to bring them into the table so that we can become a better organization. I also do pre-retreat assignments, and I usually start these a month in advance. Once a week, I send an assignment out to all the participants, and it's a real simple assignment. It's a 1 page worth of work that they have to think through. And the idea behind this is so that they can be prepared and to begin thinking about the kind of things that they're going to want to say when they're in the room, the kind of ideas that they're going to want to bring up to the group when they're in the room. Some of those would be, as an example, the first week I might send out a copy of the old vision, mission, values, whatever the organization calls those things in there. And I want people to reflect on those. Are we doing what we say we're doing? Is this who we really are? Is this really the process that we operate? And if not, tell me why not. But if so, I ask everyone to find 2 examples of somebody that is living the values and write me a little paragraph on them. Somebody from the organization at a lower level, someone that's not in the room. Here's our core value. Here's one of our core values. And here's somebody that amplifies that. All right. And they write that out. And then the other one is somebody in the room, somebody that's going to be in this strategic planning. Show me one of the core values and who really amplifies that. Those answers become part of what I'm going to call the strategic planning book, the book that we're going to hand people. We usually will take time for people to brag about their people at the retreat. And the reason we do that is to get people feeling good about who we are and how we're going about that, and in addition to giving recognition to the people that have earned it, whether they're in the room or not in the room. The last piece of that I almost always try to tell people is that if you've heard something great from some vice president about somebody else, and you've heard that, go and tell that somebody else that they were bragging on them. It's good for the organization. So there's lots of side benefits you can get from this, but that's a real good one. Another would be the SWOT analysis. I want everyone to do a SWOT analysis, and we'll show you how we kind of line those up in the future, and then how we determine what those are going to be. So if you have 8 people in a room and you ask them to talk about our 4 greatest strengths, weaknesses, opportunity, and threats, right, in each of these categories, you're probably going to have a list of about 15 or 16 things per category. Right? And then we end up doing a process that in order to narrow it down to what our real strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats are, the ones at least we need to focus on right now in the short term. Also, before the retreat, I want you to distribute the agenda. This agenda that we've worked on before may have gotten revised after we've gotten these 4 pre-retreat assignments down. Distribute that to people ahead of time so that they can see what they're getting into. They can see what the process is going to look like, and they can come prepared on when they might have to talk. If you're looking for anyone else to make a presentation, make sure that they know, hey, during this section, I'm going to want you to talk 15 minutes about X, Y, or Z, whatever it is that's going on, because that sets the framework for the discussion that's going to be coming up as well. And having that agenda and distributing that gives everybody an opportunity to know what's coming, so they're not side hit from the side and made on, something come up that they weren't aware it was going to be. And then the last thing I like to do is create a strategic planning book and distribute at the retreat. So each person that's there gets a book. It's probably, 10, 12 pages long with tabs, and each section is going to be this and that. What goes in there is we do everybody's SWOT. We kind of consolidate and put all the SWOT answers down. We end up using that for an exercise later. We put in all the wonderful things that people have said about each other in a separate document, just in case we don't get a time to talk about it in person. It's there for everyone to read. That Sally did a great job, and she really handles our core values and all of that. So having that strategic planning book, it gives somebody two reasons for it. One, they can follow along as we're moving and know what's coming up next, not just the agenda, but the details that end up behind that agenda. And second is that next year, they keep that book, and next year it gives us a start on what we're going to be talking about in the next year's strategic planning event. Now, not everyone's going to be the same people necessarily. You've got turnover, you've got retirement, you've got new folks coming in, but those that have been there now can go back and refresh themselves on what we decided last year and think about how they did themselves on that. So here's a sample agenda. So we're going to talk a little bit about process right now. This happens to be a 2.5-day retreat agenda, and day one, the first half of the day is all about stuff that people think might not matter, but it does. And in this is first we tell everyone what's going to happen. The president, the CEO gets up and gives a little report on what they see. We work on the SWOT analysis. Then we do the cultural exercises, review the previous year. So we're doing everything in history up front. All that happens before lunch on the first day. Then as soon as we get through lunch, we start identifying some of the barriers that are in front of us. We might have cash flow problems. We might have competitors crawling up our tail. We might have whatever. So we want to identify those things and just make sure that we're aware of those before we start working on the plan. Identify the top 5 maximum areas of focus, which we call objectives. Here are the things that we're looking at. And these are not SMART goals here at this point. A SMART goal being, measurable and achievable and all the rest of the SMART goal piece. But these are the objectives. The objectives are things like increased sales. This is good enough, right? That's going to be our objective. Do you want to quantify it? You can, but you don't necessarily need to here. Talk about the resources. And this is where the CEO comes back in and saying, here's what we're going to do. Here's how much time we're going to spend. Here's how much money we're going to spend. Here's what's available to us. All of that gets done before we even start working on what the plan is. Summarize the day, plan for the tomorrow, and do some even logistics. Okay. Day 2, start by summarizing the day. Word of caution here. Day 1, people have a tough time sleeping that night. Their mind is just racing. It's going a million miles an hour on all the things that they want to make sure they say, all the things that they think we can do, all the problems that we've had in the past that we need to overcome, and all of that. So be prepared for people to come in a little bit tired. Sometime the evening of logistics, they get tired doing that as well. If it's happy hours and dancing and things like that, people end up doing that. But their minds are racing by the time we get into day 2. Talk about that a little bit. And that's where the open discussion comes in, for people to say, to get things off their chest so that they can lighten up. What we want to do is lighten people up so that they are able to communicate better. Talk a little bit about the process, and then we do breakout groups, and we have breakout groups working on some of the different objectives, and then they continue to those groups. And this is where most of the work gets done, is in small groups. Let's say there's a group that says increase sales. That was one of the objectives. We put a group on that, and we have them start working on what a plan work. 4 or 5 people in that group talking about what a sales plan might look like to them. And the other group's working on some operational issues or something else that we needed to work on, a legal issue, not issues as much, but legal strategies potentially, right? And they work on those kind of things. So they've come together with a group. There's a lot of discussion that happens in these small groups. Facilitator would generally bounce around from group to group to keep people on pace and keep them thinking. This is really where the brainstorming comes in during this section. After the afternoon break on the second day, each of those teams, these small groups, and we probably have 4 of them, maybe 6, 4 or 5, whatever number of objectives we have, those teams get up and make a presentation to the entire group. Answer clarifying questions. Here's why we came up with what we came up with, to put the why behind what their plan ended up looking like. And that's a real fun thing, right? Getting people to talk about how their group created this awesome plan, and then they have support for that plan, right? And here's why. Oh, we talked about that. Right? It's a fun time for everybody. We then summarize the day and plan for tomorrow. Then take a break. Even just again, I recommend something fun. Just keep doing fun stuff. This is intense work. People are overloaded. We need to give them a way to release and have some fun. Day 3, we kind of organize the rest of it. So here's what we talked about yesterday. Want everyone to relook at it. What's right? What's wrong with this plan? How's it playing for you? And strategies and action plans. And then we start assigning the champions of those objectives, or even if there's some goals, we might start assigning the goals on that. And in addition to that, we talk about how to go about implementing those and the implementation process. And again, that's a little bit later in this presentation, but the champions, they assign the champions to that. And the champion is usually somebody that's in that room. They're the ones that we're talking about it. Doesn't have to be the person that's functionally responsible for the area, although it makes sense to. And if it's not somebody functionally responsible for the sales, say the chief sales officer is not the champion for the increased sales, you would want to bring a vice president of sales into the team that you're going to create that's going to work on creating the action steps for that plan. So you do need some functional responsibility within there, although the champion doesn't have to be. Champion just means you are responsible to deliver. You are responsible for it. Okay. And then we break, do final activity if you want, or go home, or however it ends up being. So that's what a 2.5-day session looks like. A 3-day session looks like we do something really fun at the end of the 2.5 day because people really need it. Process during the retreat. These are just high level things. We want to keep pace with the agenda. More difficult than you think to keep pace with an agenda because people want to talk. They will go down rabbit holes. And some of those rabbit holes are necessary to go down, but only so far. We're not there to solve all the problems for the organization and all the details within those problems. There may be one that's big enough for all the C-level people to work on at one time. And at that time, we allow that to happen. But generally, keeping pace means keeping on target, doing what we say we're going to do when we're going to do it so that we get everything in that's supposed to be in these 2.5 days. And we're not keeping people for 10, 12 hours a day. It's just too intense a work to do that long. I've got one company that likes to do 8-hour days because they want to maximize their time. I even think an 8-hour day might be a little bit too long for most because of how intense these processes and these meetings actually end up getting. And intense, not so much in conflict, but intense in the emotional responses that people have to the plan that's being created. It's really energizing at the time and draining as well. So an 8-hour day is difficult. 10-hour day, I wouldn't recommend at all. Just don't do it. But here's the good news. When we're having those fun activities in the evening, whether it's dinner and drinks or dinner and dancing or bowling or jet skiing or whatever we do, your people are still talking about what they just did that day. You're actually getting the 10 hours of a work day, but they don't feel like they're working. They're just talking with some of their friends. They're becoming friends, closer friends, because they're doing these activities together. And so you're going to get a lot more out of it than the 6 or 8 hours that we've scheduled on the agenda, because the conversations will continue. The guy with the cheese head smiling at me right in the middle of this, that's like, great. So I don't have your name there, but I just keep thinking you like me when I'm saying, but I realize it's just a picture. So anyway, thanks for that photo. What we want to do is we want to build consensus through dialogue. Very rarely do we want to vote on things. There are a couple that we will vote on, but very rarely we want to build consensus. And consensus, in my world, my definition is not that everyone has to agree. We don't keep talking till everyone agrees. What we do is we keep talking to people till those that don't agree can at least support where we go. We need to come out with a unified communication plan that we are all on target with. So consensus means making sure that people can support that. And just one little clue, the fastest way to get people to support your idea is to listen to their reasons for not first. Not having 7 of us gang up on one and telling them why they're wrong. Just the opposite. Listening to what they have to say kind of just relaxes them, diffuses them. And when the people felt heard, and then over their decision, their idea isn't going to be the one that carries the day, at least they're comfortable and they're no longer fighting that idea, and they can end up supporting the idea that the group came up with. So consensus through dialogue. We want to push the limits, but we want to be reasonable. Not going to say we're not going to move from 20 million to 100 million in revenue overnight. All right. But having a stretch goal, having something that's just out of the realm of possibility is not a bad thing. So push that limits. What if we could get to there?